True crime, Sandy Hook, the locked door, and the question America still has not answered. The question that still has no easy answer. The locked school, the missed warnings, and the legacy still moving through the courts. Content note: this article discusses a school shooting involving children, with restrained references to violence, legal evidence, misinformation, and public policy. The front entrance at Sandy Hook Elementary was designed to control access. The school day had already begun. The doors were locked, the ordinary morning was moving, and a meeting was underway inside the building. A locked door can make a place feel safer. It can also become the detail people return to when they try to understand what safety meant before the first alarm. In Newtown, Connecticut, the question did not begin in a courtroom. It began with sound, confusion, and a school trying to protect children with the tools it had. Official records later placed the first critical moments shortly after 9:30 a.m. on December 14, 2012. This article follows how a local school day became a criminal investigation, a public health review, a civil accountability battle, and a continuing legal argument about weapons, warning signs, truth, and responsibility. The hardest part of Sandy Hook is that the central facts are known, while the deepest question remains resistant to a clean answer. The life before the case. Sandy Hook Elementary was not a symbol before it was a school. It was a place of classrooms, staff meetings, parent calls, office routines, children's work, and the ordinary structure that gives a school day its shape. The official record preserves names, not full lives. The children remembered by the Connecticut Office of the Child Advocate included Aviel Anna, Allison, Benjamin Caroline, Catherine Charlotte, Chase, Daniel, Dylan Emily, Grace, Jack, Jesse, Josephine, Jessica, James, Madeline, Noah, and Olivia. The adults killed at the school were educators and staff members whose work placed them inside that ordinary morning. The limitation matters. Public records can show time, location, response, and investigative findings. They cannot hold the full private shape of a child's life, a classroom relationship, or a family routine. That absence should not make the victims feel less real. It means the case has to be handled carefully. Not as spectacle, not as a puzzle for online reconstruction, but as a record of people whose lives became known through the worst thing that happened around them. The school itself becomes the first human detail. It was built for learning, not for being studied as a crime scene. The people around them. The supporting cast in Sandy Hook is not cleanly divided into heroes, villains, and bystanders. It includes children, educators, families, first responders, investigators, state officials, lawyers, advocates, and later, people who exploited falsehoods about the case. Inside the school, Principal Dawn Hawksprung and school psychologist Mary Sherlock were in a planning and placement team meeting when loud banging was heard. The state's attorney's report says Hawksprung and Sherlock left the room, with Hawksprung telling others to stay put. That ordinary command became one of the small documented moments that showed staff reacting before they could fully know what was happening. Outside the school story sat another home in Newtown, on Yogananda Street. Adam Lanza lived there with his mother, Nancy Lanza. The official criminal report identifies him as the shooter and concludes he acted alone, while the later Child Advocate review examined his developmental, educational, medical, and mental health history for prevention lessons. That distinction is crucial. The criminal report asked who was responsible and whether anyone else could be prosecuted. The Child Advocate report asked how a young man with severe isolation, untreated decline, and access to firearms reached a point of mass violence. One report closed a criminal file. The other left a public health question open. The first cracks. The warning signs in Sandy Hook did not form a simple line. They were scattered across childhood records, school difficulties, family accommodation, social withdrawal, violent preoccupation, and missed opportunities for sustained intervention. The Office of the Child Advocate found that Lanza had significant developmental challenges from early childhood, including communication and sensory difficulties, socialization delays, and repetitive behaviors. It also found early indications of violent preoccupation and a later pattern of withdrawal from school life. The report did not say autism caused the attack. It did not say mental illness predicts mass violence. It described a specific deteriorating individual whose complex needs were not met with sustained effective care and whose isolation deepened over time. That distinction is one of the case's most important safeguards against lazy explanation. Diagnosis is not destiny. Isolation is not proof. Strange behavior is not violence. But the record shows that, in this case, multiple untreated and self-reinforcing problems narrowed one life until almost nothing healthy remained. The first crack, then, was not one dramatic threat. It was a pattern, retreat, accommodation, obsession, and a world shrinking around a person with access to lethal means. The last, ordinary movements. December 14, 2012, began with 2 locations that would later have to be processed as crime scenes. Was the Lanza home. The other was Sandy Hook Elementary. The state's attorney's report says Lanza killed his mother at their home before going to the school. It then places him outside Sandy Hook Elementary in a 2010 Honda Civic, parked near a no-parking zone, shortly after 9:30 a.m. The school doors were locked. That fact matters because it corrects one common misunderstanding. Sandy Hook was not simply unsecured in the way people sometimes imagine after a mass attack. The shooter entered by firing through plate glass beside the front lobby doors. Inside, the day was still ordinary enough for meetings, office work, classroom activity, and attendance. The state's attorney's report noted that enrollment on December 13th was 489 students, and that staffing on December 14th stood at 82% for the day. The last ordinary movement was not one child walking down one hallway. It was a whole institution doing what schools do, beginning the morning, trusting the clock, and assuming a locked door still meant what it was supposed to mean. The first alarm. The first alarm was not a single clean signal. It was noise, glass, gunfire, staff reaction, 911 calls, and an intercom that became part of the warning system. Main office staff reported hearing noises and breaking glass at about 9:35 a.m. The state's attorney's report says a phone in room 9 was used to turn on the school-wide intercom, apparently inadvertently, but the effect was to give other parts of the building notice of what was happening. That detail is difficult because it shows how prevention and improvisation can meet in the same second. The intercom was not a designed emergency revelation. It became one because people were moving under pressure. Law enforcement response was fast in clock terms. The state's attorney's report says fewer than 4 minutes passed from the first 911 call to the arrival of the first police officer at the school, and fewer than 6 minutes passed from that officer's arrival on school property to the first officer entering the building. The gap between speed and loss is one of the brutal realities of the case. A rapid response did not mean enough time. The search for an explanation. Investigators first had to answer a basic criminal question. Was anyone else involved? That question mattered because early confusion included fears of more than one shooter. The state's attorney's report says people found in wooded areas around the school were initially treated as suspects until their identities could be determined, and that those circumstances were fully investigated. DNA testing from the school and the Yogananda Street home did not reveal accessories or co-conspirators. The official conclusion was that Adam Lanza acted alone and was solely criminally responsible. The report also said that unless new reliable information appeared, there would be no state criminal prosecution because the shooter was dead and no evidence supported charging anyone else. That legal answer did not answer the human question. The state's attorney's report stated plainly that why he murdered 27 people, including his mother and the 26 victims at Sandy Hook Elementary, may never be answered conclusively. It found planning, access to firearms, and obsession with mass murder, but no clear indication of why he targeted the school. The search for explanation therefore split in two. The criminal file could close. The public question could not. The evidence that did not fit. Sandy Hook produced evidence on several levels: physical evidence, firearms evidence, digital material, medical findings, witness accounts, and institutional records. The most useful way to understand it is not as one cinematic clue, but as a narrowing process. The state's attorney's report says the Bushmaster Model XM15E2S rifle was found in the same classroom as the shooter's body, and that tested 5.56mm shell casings from the school were fired from that rifle. It also identified other firearms recovered at the school, in the shooter's car, and at the Yogananda Street home, and stated that the firearms had been legally purchased by Nancy Lanza. Digital evidence helped investigators examine interest, preparation, and isolation, but it did not provide every answer. The state's attorney's report noted that a computer hard drive recovered from the shooter's home remained unreadable, and that recovering data appeared highly improbable. The child advocate report later added a broader behavioral picture. It described severe isolation, worsening mental health concerns, possible anorexia-related impairment, and an increasing obsession with mass murder. It also said the attack did not appear to be someone simply snapping, but a planned act by someone who had studied the school's website and security procedures. The evidence could show planning. It could show access. It could show obsession. It could not directly record the private moment when fantasy became decision. The event at the center of the case. The central event has to be described with restraint, because graphic detail adds little to understanding. The legal meaning is clear without reproducing suffering. The state's attorney's report says Lanza entered the locked school by shooting through glass beside the front lobby doors. He was armed with a Bushmaster rifle, a Glock pistol, a Sig Sauer pistol, and a large supply of ammunition. He first encountered staff near the hallway, and then moved through the school in a sequence that lasted minutes, not hours. The report states that 20 children and 6 adults were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary, and 2 adults were wounded. It also states that Lanza killed himself with a Glock pistol at about 9:43 a.m., the time between the doors being locked at 9:30 a.m., and his death was fewer than 11 minutes. The numbers are often repeated because they are the simplest way to describe scale, but the numbers can also flatten the event. Each minute contained decisions by staff, children hiding, first responders approaching, parents not yet knowing, and a school trying to survive something it had never been built to absorb. The legal reconstruction also shows what did not happen. Investigators found no evidence of a second shooter, no prosecutable co-conspirator, and no basis to charge another person with aiding the attack. The event itself ended quickly. The investigation did not. When the story broke open, Sandy Hook became more than a local criminal case almost immediately because of who was attacked, where it happened, and what the attack exposed about American life. Connecticut's official reviews moved in different directions. The state's attorney's report focused on criminal responsibility. The Office of the Child Advocate focused on developmental, educational, medical, and mental health history. The Sandy Hook Advisory Commission reviewed school safety, mental health, law enforcement response, and public policy. The public version often compresses that into one phrase: Sandy Hook changed the gun debate. The record is more specific. It changed debates about locked school entrances, emergency response, threat assessment, family isolation, mental health access, firearm storage, rifle marketing, online radicalization, conspiracy culture, and the legal reach of civil accountability. The aftermath also revealed a second injury: the spread of false claims that the attack was staged or that families were actors. Those claims did not change the official facts, but they changed the lives of families who were forced to defend reality while grieving. That is why Sandy Hook cannot be understood only as a shooting. It became a test of whether public truth could survive public cruelty. The case, built from fragments. The strongest official explanation is not a motive. It is a convergence. The Child Advocate report found no single tipping point. It described a cascade of events, many self-imposed: loss of school, absence of work, a broken friendship, little family contact, extreme isolation, fear of losing the home environment, worsening, obsessive-compulsive symptoms, depression, anxiety, anorexia, and growing obsession with mass murder. That does not mean each factor caused the attack. It means the case resists the cheap comfort of a single explanation. A diagnosis alone cannot explain it. A weapon alone cannot explain it. A family dynamic alone cannot explain it. A violent obsession alone cannot explain it. The horror came from interaction, not one isolated variable. The legal record also narrows what can be said about intent. Investigators believed the attack was planned. The state's attorney's report said the evidence showed planning, including the taking of his own life, but no clear indication why he chose the school. That is the difference between evidence and meaning. Evidence can establish conduct. Meaning often remains partial. The public wants motive, because motive feels like control. Sandy Hook offers something colder. Enough information to reject randomness, not enough to satisfy the deepest why. The outcome that did not end the story. The criminal outcome was unusual because there was no living defendant to try. The state's attorney concluded that Lanza was solely criminally responsible, that no evidence showed prosecutable assistance or conspiracy, and that the state criminal investigation was closed unless new reliable information emerged. The report identified the most significant crimes as murder with special circumstances at Sandy Hook, attempted murder with special circumstances for the 2 wounded adults, and murder in the killing of Nancy Lanza. A closed criminal case did not close the accountability story. Families later pursued civil litigation against the maker and seller of the rifle used in the attack. The Connecticut Supreme Court allowed a narrow claim to proceed under state unfair trade practices law, while finding many other claims blocked by state law or the Federal Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. That legal distinction mattered. The case was not simply gunmaker liable for a shooting. It centered on whether marketing practices could be challenged under Connecticut law, despite broad federal protections for the firearms industry. In 2022, families of 9 victims reached a $73 million settlement in that litigation. The family's attorneys described it as the available insurance coverage. The criminal file had ended with no trial. The civil file created a different kind of record. The aftermath people still argue about. Sandy Hook's aftermath split into prevention work, civil accountability, misinformation litigation, and gun law challenges. Sandy Hook Promise, founded and led by several family members whose loved ones were killed, describes its mission as educating and empowering youth and adults to prevent violence in schools, homes, and communities. Its programs focus on knowing warning signs, reducing isolation, and reporting concerns to trusted adults or anonymous systems. The organization's public impact claims include confirmed young lives saved from suicide, planned school shootings prevented, and hundreds of thousands of anonymous tips received through its system. Those claims are advocacy claims from the organization itself, but they show how some families tried to turn memory into prevention infrastructure. The misinformation cases created another legal path. Alex Jones and his company faced defamation judgments over false claims about Sandy Hook. In October 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his challenge to the Connecticut judgment, leaving the judgment in place, while collection and asset issues continued through other proceedings. That litigation was not about whether Sandy Hook happened. Official investigations had already established that. It was about the damage caused when lies about a mass killing were sold to an audience and pushed back onto grieving families. The aftermath became a second case about truth. The review, appeal, or unanswered question. As of July 5, 2026, the most current legal development tied to Sandy Hook is not a criminal appeal. It is a constitutional fight over Connecticut's post-Sandy Hook assault weapon restrictions. Connecticut passed its assault weapon ban in 2013 after Sandy Hook, and the state later expanded firearm restrictions. In August 2025, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit upheld Connecticut's laws at the preliminary injunction stage, finding them consistent with the nation's historical tradition of regulating unusually dangerous weapons, while preserving legal alternatives for self-defense. On June 30, 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court granted review in Grant v. Higgins, consolidated with Viramontes v. Cook County. The Supreme Court docket says the cases were consolidated and allotted 1 hour for oral argument. That case will not retry Sandy Hook. It will not decide what happened inside the school. It will address whether the Second and 14th Amendments protect a right to possess a AR-15 platform and similar semi-automatic rifles, the question presented through the consolidated cases. The legal question is narrower than the public emotion surrounding it. That is why it matters. Sandy Hook keeps returning not because the facts are unknown, but because the meaning of those facts remains contested in law, politics, memory, and prevention. Why this case still matters. Sandy Hook still matters because it sits at the intersection of 4 unresolved American arguments. The first is school safety. A locked entrance mattered, but it was not enough. Emergency response was rapid, but speed could not undo the force and pace of the attack. The record forces a hard distinction between security measures that help and security measures that cannot carry the whole burden. The second is warning signs. The Child Advocate Report does not let the public pretend there were no signs. It also does not allow the easier mistake of turning every isolated, autistic, anxious, or unusual young person into a threat. Prevention requires precision, not panic. The third is truth. The conspiracy aftermath showed that a crime can keep harming families long after the scene is cleared, especially when public platforms reward denial and harassment. The fourth is law. Sandy Hook led to civil litigation against a gunmaker, defamation judgments against a conspiracy broadcaster, prevention organizations founded by families, and a Supreme Court case about assault weapon bans. The case moved from classrooms to courtrooms without ever becoming only a legal abstraction. The locked door remains the right image because it holds the central failure without pretending there was only one. A school can lock a door. A society has to decide what else it is willing to notice before the glass breaks.